Staff hired as part of the controversial anti-violence program in Peoria are left with a job after the City-County Health Board most recent decision, but their commitment, they say, isn't going unnoticed.
Cure violence was once again a main topic of conversation at tonight's Board of Health meeting. Madison Porter shares some of the last steps the group is taking as it officially closes the contract.
Earlier this month, the Peoria City-County Health Department decided to terminate its contract with a controversial anti-violence program, Cure Violence. At Monday night's Board of Health meeting, administration shared its closure plan. That included notifying Cure Violence Global of that decision, the city on grant agreement termination, and the possibility of reallocating money from federal discretionary funders.
We are seeking potential reallocation to other projects. And so we are working on drafting up a communication for the board to review as to what those potential projects could look like as we notify our federal partners about that contract as well.
The outreach workers and violence interrupters that Peoria City-County Health Department hired as part of Cure Violence have also been notified of the layoffs, but the board unanimously agreed to compensate those workers in good standing for 40 hours of pay. Along with that, the Board of Health will continue the program manager's role to assist in the closure.
Very similar to the letter that was provided, the communication that was provided to City Council as well as the County Board, just kind of expressing that the board's decision to transition out of Cure Violence into potentially a different opportunity.
The big local recipient of funding, House of Hope, was required to submit final financial documents by the end of Monday to the Board of Health, and they did so in order to continue with the fiscal audit of the Cure Violence program. The unspent money must be returned to the Health Department by October 1st. In Peoria, I'm Madison Porter, 25 News.